Today we're going to begin talking about the radiology chapter in the CPT code book. There's at least 2 podcasts, depending on how long they go, it may be 3. But we'll start with Chapter 5, Part 1. These are the subsections in the radiology chapter. If you're looking at the beginning of the chapter, these are the ones that would be in a green font, signifying the subsections. Most of your time is going to be spent in the first 2, the x-rays and the ultrasound, but depending on where you're coding, what setting, you would very well be using the other ones just as often. The first question that you, the coder, has to answer is, who am I billing for? The professional component only is when the radiologist is interpreting the report. Like if you are billing for the radiologist, you're going to bill whatever the code is from the radiology chapter with the modifier 26. If you're billing for the facility that is providing only the technical component, you're going to use a modifier TC. And if you're billing for the facility that's providing both the equipment and the radiologist, you do not need a modifier. Note that the modifiers are different depending upon whom you're coding for. This is just a review of those modifiers. Also, the payers have specific requirements, so depending on the insurance company, you will have direction as to how they want you to bill it. These are things that just come with learning to code, depending on where you're working. Your orientation is going to include helping you understand who the most common payers are and how we have to submit our claims. Here is examples of using those modifiers in the way in which we just talked about. A radiologic examination of the esophagus. Images were interpreted by an independent radiologist not associated with the facility. What code will the radiologist report? In other words, you're the coder coding the radiologist work, and he or she will code the CPT code 74220 with a 26 modifier indicating only the radiologist component was provided. In the second example, you are coding for the facility. It's the same scenario, radiologic examination of the esophagus, images interpreted by an independent radiologist not associated with the facility. What would you report if you were coding for the facility? And that would be 74220 with a modifier TC. And here you see a screenshot from the codebook showing you 74220, which is an x-ray of the esophagus. If you remember my conventions in my codebook, I circle the families. I underline those codes that stand alone. I highlight the significant terms within the family or within the code description. The super bill or the Chargemaster in our facilities do most of this assignment of these codes for x-rays especially, but you still need to be aware of those conventions, and if you're on a national exam, you would have to find the code. After graduation, if you are employed by either radiology, anesthesiology, or pathology, you're going to need a lot deeper lessons for this section of the code book. It's beyond the scope of this class to go into it, but just be aware that if you code for these specialties, it is a specialty to code for this type of providers as well as cardiac or cardiovascular. Those are just specialties within the field that we all know takes a special level of expertise to code. I want to talk a bit more about the Chargemaster so you know about it. It is used for billing in all facilities, not just CPT codes. You would have it in their hospitals, any of your providers. It's just a big master list of all the charges that you can pull from in a specific facility. The people that are in charge of the Chargemaster really have to make sure that all the updates each year for the ICD-10 code set, the CPT, and the HIT241 are reflected in the current billing software, so you'd be sure you're pulling up the right codes. And as a reminder, ICD-10 code updates become effective October 1st each year. CPT and HIT241 become effective January 1st of each year. Occasionally you will have updates published more frequently, and that would be communicated by whoever's making the change. But for the most part, these are the dates that you have to remember. There are CPT codes that represent complete procedures, meaning everything is done within that procedure. There's also limited procedures. So you have to be sure when you're selecting your code that you're reading those code descriptions carefully to be sure you're selecting the code that reflects whatever procedure you're coding. This example is a unilateral lymphangiography of the extremity with a complete procedure. You know that the extremity isn't specified in the documentation, but it turns out it doesn't matter because the code is the same for both the arm and the leg. You may recall from other podcasts, as I move through these PowerPoints, I'll show the example without the answer, and then I'll show the answer. My hope is that as you go through these podcasts or through the PowerPoint itself, once you've printed the PDF, you would try to find your answers before you look at them, so that you're always finding out where things are in your code book. So here are the two codes you would have to use for this procedure. The first thing I'm doing is showing you that the arm and the leg are the same codes for the lymphangiography. And then there's an instructional note in your CPT code book that's just before the 75801 code that says, for injection procedure for the lymphatic system, use 38790. The first thing you have to know is that a lymphangiography does require an injection. So put that wherever you need to put it to remember that anytime you have a graphy, that last suffix, graphy, you're more than likely looking at an injection to accomplish that. And then remember that your guidelines in the CPT code book can either be before or after a code. I wish there was more conventions around that like there are in the ICD-10 CM and PCS code book, but they are not. This is how it's written. So you have to be sure you always read above and below the code that you're selecting. And this is the 75801, a screenshot of this code in your code book. It's in the veins and lymphatics subsection. I've labeled that for you at the bottom. And you also see just above the 75801 code for injection procedure for lymphatic system, use 38790. I blew it up. This is the same screenshot, just blown up a little bit so you can read it easier. And then this is a screenshot of the 38750 injection procedure lymphangiography. It does not apply to this scenario we are coding right now, but I just want to show you in the code below that I have used with a breast code. That is if you were doing this work to identify the sentinel nodes. It's just a reminder to me of how you might use that code in a different scenario. You notice at the top of this column I have written what this column's for is the lymph nodes and lymphatic channels. That is drawn from the previous page's subheadings. And here I have blown it up, the very same thing, just blown up. You do notice that this code description also tells you for a bilateral procedure where you're injecting both sides of the body, modifier 50 would be used. It also tells you for the supervision and the interpretation of this examination, you would use these codes, which of course we chose in our earlier slide. Okay, now let's look at some things in the textbook. Exercise 5.1 number 2 is a diagnostic CAT scan of the colon with and without contrast. Many times when you look in the code book, you're going to see where something is scanned with contrast, without contrast, and then it might be without contrast followed by contrast. 3 different ways that can work for some studies, not for all of them. But this particular scenario is just a diagnostic CAT scan of the colon with and without contrast. And here you see how it is found in our code book. I believe it can also be found under CAT scans. So there's different ways the index can be used. This is just giving you one path. And here's this particular code showing you how it would be coded. And the reason why I have written here on the right hand side with and without contrast is because the way it's worded in the code description, it says with contrast including non-contrast images. So instead of saying with and without, it says it this way. So I've made a note for myself that this code means with and without contrast. Our next example is 5.1 number 4, lumbosacral myelography, radiological supervision and interpretation only. Sometimes in this chapter, the codes are for just the radiological supervision and interpretation, so you really have to read those. And here you go, I have a screenshot with this code and its descriptors. As a reminder, up at the top, the heading of these slides, the green is the subsection in the chapter. The spine and pelvis is the part of the body that we're looking at. Next example, the CAT scan of the lumbar spine without contrast. And there is your code. There's a screenshot of your code book showing you the code family and the different descriptors. This is one that does show you without contrast, with contrast, and then without followed by with contrast. An upper GI X-ray exam with a KUB. And here I have the code set. You notice that when we go to X-ray GI tract, it does take us, refers us to GI tract imaging. And then I have there all those codes that you have to look at to choose the correct one. Here's your code family, and you notice I have underlined without KUB and with KUB. A limited ultrasound of a pregnant uterus to determine a fetal position. In this case, a diagnostic ultrasound, it is defined as limited, and you are doing it for a specific purpose, being to determine fetal position. A lot of times when you are selecting a code, you are going to read the different code descriptions within a range of codes that's referred to you by the index to find the specific thing that you're looking for. You see we have all these ranges given to us in the index, but when we go to these codes and start reading, it does say fetal position would be one reason why you would do this ultrasound. An ultrasound of the kidney, complete. You have a range of codes to read through. And when you read through, you notice it is defined as complete. I have highlighted the terms complete and limited. Look at the top of the slide, diagnostic ultrasound. It's a subsection within this chapter. And abdomen and retroperitoneum is the part of the body because the kidneys fall into the retroperitoneum. If you have any questions about part 1, please post them in the discussion board along with the path you use to try and find the code, and I will do my best to answer them. Please begin now with part 2.